describes that. This is the golden segment. And so you can solve for the golden ratio by just making the ratio between the smaller part and the larger part equal to the ratio between the larger part and the whole part. And so it's a self-contained principle. You don't need to introduce any exterior elements in order to generate all these patterns. And then the fact that the solution includes this 5, I found to be significant because it kind of implies that the 5 closes the cycle a little bit. And embedded within this whole Fibonacci sequence growth pattern are these 5-stage cycles that are described here. And I'll get to those later. Okay, so during geogenesis, you've got all the elements, and they're determined by all the 4 forces. Which, from 5 to 8, you've got another phase change where life arises. There's a threshold of the spherical Earth. Right here, you've got a 3-dimensional Earth. It's becoming a 2-dimensional biosphere. In 5, you've got this 4-dimensional time space, and it's becoming a 3-dimensional geosphere. And so you can see this pattern kind of repeats 4 dimensions to 3, and then 3 to 2, 2 to 1, 1 to 0. From 8 to 13, the phase change is complex life. So at 13, you've got nervous systems, and cells are becoming organisms. From 13 to 21, you've got the phase change of reflectivity, which is really important for Teilhard. The 2-dimensional biosphere reaches a threshold where it starts to fold back in on itself into a tighter dimension of 1. 21 is anthropogenesis, and then there's a phase change where you've got hunting and gathering, and that leads you to 34, which is noogenesis, and then there's a phase change, which is agriculture. And that leads you to 55, which is starting to create local social effects. And they start to aggregate. And from 55 to 89, you've got a scientific revolution. And that leads to global social effects in 89. And then 89 to 144, you've got industry as a phase change. So every time there's a phase change, it's qualitative because it's almost like time stops for a minute. And the energy that's being introduced into the system, like when you freeze water. You're lowering the temperature and nothing's happening because all that energy is going into changing the quality of water from being a liquid to an ice. So all these qualitative changes, the energy is going in the radial direction only for an unknown time because time kind of doesn't exist in that dimension. So at 233, we've got global ecological effects because of technology. And then there might be some kind of phase change after that that would arrive at 5, which is the golden ratio, where maybe society, maybe the noosphere reaches some kind of 1-dimensional threshold and has to go into the 0th dimension, which could possibly be the etheric realm or like being free from space and time, that kind of stuff. It could also be some kind of hyper-reflective superorganism of the human, where all the individual reflectivities have become one basically individual. So what's happening here is that everything is embedded in these fractional dimensional layers. In the beginning, everything was in full relation to itself, and then energy was embedded in space-time. And so you've got energy embedded in a temporosphere. And then you go from the 4th dimension to the 3rd dimension, and you've got matter embedded in the geosphere. And then the 3rd dimension becomes a 2nd dimension, and you've got consciousness embedded, or life embedded in matter, and then you get consciousness embedded in life. And then self-awareness becomes embedded in consciousness. And eventually, you would hope to get to some kind of place where the human space becomes earthling space, and you get a globality, a global self-awareness embedded in the earthling. So there's all these stages of embeddedness where things are complexifying and becoming more embedded in a lower dimensional space. And what's happening is these 5 stages I think are really important because there's a lot of talk about a quaternity, 1, 2, 3, 4. And there's a sense in which when you get to the 4, you're starting a new level with new qualities, and that 4 would be this phase transition, and 4 is actually equal to the 1 of the next cycle. But if you do that, then you end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, and that there's something a little off about that. But if you start with 0 and let 0 actually manifest this phase change, then you get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 becomes identical to 0. And so you get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that maintains the quaternity, but it also points to this 5th kind of completing element, which can be thought of as a birth canal. So you don't just come out of the womb and then suddenly you're in the world. There's a process, a channel that you have to go through, and that would be the 0. Okay. So what's happening here with the spiral is that there's two things occurring at once. It's getting bigger and bigger. These numbers are obviously getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that kind of can be symbolized by this outward motion. So complexity is going up, space is going up, the universe is expanding and it's accelerating into an expansion, entropy is going up, all these things are going up. But at the same time, if you look in instead of out, then you get this kind of constricting element. And that's the acceleration of time, because the ratios between these two numbers, 2 and 1, 3 and 2, 5 and 3, the ratios are written out here. And they get closer and closer to 5. And so what's happening is that while you've got this outward accelerating expansion of space and complexity and entropy, at the exact same time you've got this inward, the dimensions are going from 4 to 0, and time is getting faster and faster and faster, the rate of change is going faster and faster and faster, and it's this dynamic, I don't know if the forces are opposing, but there's dual forces acting, and it's the dynamism between those two forces going out and going in that creates the impetus for motion and genesis in the world. And so when Teilhard says that everything that rises converges, and he uses a symbol of a cone to represent, and the top of the cone is the omega point, what he's